I'm Lauren Dennis, Special Consultant at the Office of Youth and Community Restoration. And on behalf of Director Catherine Lucero, I want to welcome you to the first of a two-part webinar series. These sessions will focus on implementing healing and trauma-informed design strategies that foster rehabilitation and promote well-being for youth as well as staff who work in secure settings. The promise of SB 823 envisions that youth will live close to home in smaller group settings that are as normalized as possible to enhance the youth's adolescent development. Recognizing that it may not be possible to achieve a home-like setting, there are still many ways to achieve the aspirations of safe, healing, and supportive spaces. Each of these webinars will offer practical insights and tools for making meaningful design improvements that positively impact both youth and staff. Whether you're looking to better understand the principles behind trauma-informed spaces or want to learn how to implement low-cost, impactful changes, this series will provide the guidance you need. And OYCR is pleased that you've joined us today. Now, I'd like to introduce the MASS Design Group. MASS is a nonprofit architectural firm collaborating with the Office of Youth and Community Restoration to help address immediate physical space needs for youth living in secure youth treatment facilities and support counties to utilize funding for non-secure facilities to focus on decarceration and support a return of youth to their communities. The MASS Design team will provide trauma-informed design recommendations based on research, best practices, and site visits that they've made to various California counties to create supportive youth environments in secure facilities. The team will also deliver recommendations for tailored design training and technical assistance and a research report. So now I'd like to turn it over to Alejandra Cervantes Enriquez from MASS Design.
Hi, everybody. My name is Alejandra Cervantes Enriquez. I am the project manager for our work with OYCR. I'm also a director at MASS, and I help lead all of our accompaniment and impact work at MASS, which means I work a lot in areas of research, community engagement, and different kind of strategic work. But I'm going to let my teammates introduce themselves before we get started. So, Regina.
Hi, everyone. My name is Regina Chen. I'm a senior principal and managing director at MASS, and I've been helping to guide our design engagement and restorative justice work for about the last 10 years. Violetta?
Hi, all. I'm Violeta Smart. I'm a design researcher at MASS. I have a background in architecture and have been supporting this work as a researcher and doing a lot of our data analysis and visualization.
Thank you.
And I also just wanted to name our colleague, Nathaniel, is also on the line with us. Thanks for joining, Nathaniel.
Thanks for that, Regina. So just wanted to get us situated in what the next 2 hours or so will look like together. So we will start by sharing a brief overview of the webinar and some of our goals for today. And then we're going to dive into exploring the role of the built environment in shaping experiences of youth, as well as that of staff, families, community-based organizations, and probation. Namely, we want this to highlight how design and culture goes hand in hand when we think about transforming spaces. Later on, we're going to dive into the design process. So how we can center lived experience and practice collective decision-making. And then we're going to share what this looks like in practice by highlighting what we've heard and learned from system-impacted youth and how is this shaping our design opportunities. And we're going to leave enough time at the end for discussion and questions that might come up along the way. So just as a reminder, this is part 1 of 2 webinars, as we've heard so far, but this webinar is going to focus on setting the stage for the process of design. And in just under 3 weeks, on December 9th, we're going to go through key design ideas and strategies and precedent projects. So be sure to register for that if you haven't already. It's going to be awesome. You're not going to regret it. And we hope to see you there because everything we talk about today is going to transfer over very, very seamlessly into that webinar as well. And not only is this one of 2 webinars, we are also part of a larger body of work that is aimed to support you and your staff as you support youth and each other. So we encourage you all to check out some of these other resources from the OYCR webinar series and publications on their website that have just an abundance of research from partners like UCLA, the OYCR Youth Advisory Board, ROCA, and many other organizations. So what are some of our goals for today? We want to understand how the role of the built environment goes hand in hand with culture change. We will define an expanded design process that goes beyond design and construction and actually centers lived experience and the principles of trauma-informed design. And lastly, we will learn about using the design process to foster dignity, agency, and collective decision-making. So now I'm going to pass it off to Regina.
Thanks, Sally. I'll start by sharing briefly about Mass Design Group and our approach to this work. So we were founded about 15 years ago with the design and construction of Batara District Hospital. At the time, Dr. Paul Farmer of Partners in Health asked us to help address what they were seeing all over the world. Hospitals where patients were going to get treated, but who were leaving these spaces sicker than when they came in. So at Batara, we worked with the doctors and nurses to build a hospital that would mitigate and reduce the transmission of infectious diseases using design, such as the layout and orientation of buildings on the site, designing for safer patient and staff flows, and leveraging natural ventilation. We learned one really hard realization about architecture, that it is never neutral. It can either hurt or heal. And I know many of you, probably all of you, are experiencing this every day. So we were founded with the mission to research, build, and advocate for architecture that promotes justice and human dignity. And since our founding, working in Rwanda, we've expanded to designing housing, memorials, schools, and houses, partnering with communities to advance a holistic definition of health, one that includes both physical and social health. In 2017, in response to outreach from a number of different partners, we started the Restorative Justice Design Lab. So Mass has been working with a wide variety of partners, both inside and outside the justice system, to wrestle with the impacts of mass incarceration and imagine alternative models of accountability and restorative justice. One of our key programs has been supporting the work of Restoring Promise, which is a collaboration with the Vera Institute of Justice and the Millbook Collective. And we work with them to help transform adult prison cultures, climates, and spaces. So compared to the juvenile justice system, the adult system has been much less successful in its focus to support people to return to society, as well as its ability to support the health and well-being of its staff. So for this project, we held a number of workshops with residents and staff across 5 facilities in the US to understand how design renovations, how the physical architecture of these facilities could support culture shifts in each space. Another project we have worked on is the Freedom Library Project in partnership with Dwayne Betts and his organization Freedom Reads. So we partnered with them and a couple of woodworking studios across the US to design modular curved library and worked with different departments of corrections to install them in the living area of their facilities, so that their residents could have 24-hour access to a collection of 500 books. So about this project, as Laurent mentioned, the goal of this work is to really help probation departments across the state maximize the positive impact on justice-involved youth in California. The priority of that work is to understand low cost and short-term design interventions and opportunities in secure facilities. At the same time, we know that there's not a lot of funding available for major investments in secure facilities. And so the second purpose of our work is centered around helping probation departments and different municipalities leverage available funding, which often is around less restrictive or stepped-on programs, really helping you plan not just for the next 5 years, but the next 50 years. So this webinar and our next one in December will really be focused on this first goal. And we will also be delivering a final report and training and technical assistance to support both goals together. Now, as we get into this webinar, I wanted to start with a couple of caveats or disclaimers. So we know there is not a lot of funding available to make capital investments in facilities. So our webinars will really focus on low-hanging fruit that don't require significant investments. We also know that facilities were not designed to adequately support youth and staff. and many of your spaces are in fact working against you. So our webinars will show best practices that can help bring your physical spaces alongside you to support you and your work. And also, we know that physical space changes alone are not enough. But neither can cultural or programmatic changes alone meet all the needs that you and your staff are facing. So our webinars will really focus on examples of spatial changes paired with cultural changes, really questioning and showing how the process itself can center the lived experience of system-impacted youth and staff. So I think we can all agree that webinars where someone just talks at you for an hour are the worst. So we want to hear from you as much as possible today. So we want to invite you to use the chat anytime you want to, and wanted to also start. Thanks everybody for introducing yourself. And we wanted to start with a question for you to think about and share: a place that makes you feel calm and rested. Is there somewhere that you go that just makes you feel really at peace? And as you're thinking about that space, what are elements of that space that help facilitate those feelings? So feel free to type your answers into the chat as we keep going. And Alejandra, I'll pass the mic back to you.
Thanks, Regina. I'll get going. So we're going to dive into our first section. What is the role of the built environment, and how are your buildings, your spaces, the areas you work out of, how are they helping you, or how are they keeping you from achieving impact for a positive impact for youth and staff? So first things first, we know that this is an unprecedented moment where, after years of advocacy, community organizing, California took a major step towards juvenile justice reform. And after the passing of SB 823, the Division of Juvenile Justice, and the last three juvenile state prisons officially closed in 2023, which made counties, everybody here, responsible for rehabilitating youth who would have previously been held in state facilities. So what do we know about the state of facilities as we come out of this last over a year that DJJ closed? We know that SB 823 is in full swing, but given the speed of the changes and the transition, there wasn't a lot of time to allow counties to make quick on-the-fly adaptations to be able to better serve youth that might be adjudicated for periods of up to 7 years. So we know that facilities were all in different levels of readiness to receive youth returning from DJJ, and some were even able to leverage available funding to make adaptations. But more or less everybody is navigating the transition and will be doing so for many more years to come. But as we understand the challenges from what we've heard in our engagement, it's clear that there's a need for more spaces to support CBOs and staff to be able to deliver a variety of supportive programs, a need for more staff spaces themselves for breaks, for respite and moments of pause, a need for living spaces to be therapeutic and home-like for youth, and also a need for more mental health support spaces. So let's get into some of these challenges as we understand them as well. We know that facilities in California are regulated by a number of state statutes, standards, and building codes. And while it's very helpful to have a set of standards to ensure the safety for inhabitants, it could also present barriers to quickly making adaptations on the fly to better serve youth. And our team has become very familiar with these regulations, and we acknowledge that both of these are in the midst of updates to both Title 15 and 24. So we'll come back to these regulations when we share design recommendations, as we've been very mindful of engaging BSCC to align the recommendations with the regulations as well. So we've been saying that design matters. And when we became familiar with the state statute, particularly Section 851 of the Welfare and Institutions Code, where it requires that facilities provide safe and home-like environments for youth in detention facilities, we've been wondering, how has this been a statute for 25 years? How did we get here? And how do we actually get there truly with the work ahead? We understand that most juvenile facilities in California were designed and constructed to follow specific purposes and philosophies that maybe have become outdated over time, that may have been influenced at a certain point by practices from as back as far as the 80s, maybe even before, but definitely early 90s and the 2000s, and have all correct characteristics that are maybe far from rehabilitative supportive spaces. So when we say, how do we get your buildings to better support your staff and youth, it's to actually get on the path towards rehabilitation. And what has struck us in our engagement with youth is that when they share with us, what's something that you remember from your time in facilities, we often hear very acute sensorial memories, such as descriptions of clanging metal doors or bright artificial lighting with lack of natural sunlight in the interior, as well as heavy bolted plastic or metal furniture. Very limited to no access to natural landscapes or even spaces to be in contact with the land, all the way down to very small but very impactful details, such as not being able to see your clear reflection with detention grade mirrors, which are often scratched, to slim mattresses on top of hard surfaces to sleep. And even safety rooms that we know have ties to solitary confinement spaces seen in adult carceral settings. So where can we start to look back to these spaces and truly find opportunities to create safe and supportive home-like environments? And I know you all have heard about adverse childhood experiences, but I'll keep this overview brief as one way to understand in what way do we understand to make design changes and cultural changes can go hand in hand. And this graphic is from the Office of the California Surgeon General. It highlights the concept of adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. It's a term that originates from a landmark study published well over 20 years ago, but they identified 10 categories of stressful or traumatic events that typically happen during childhood. And this research shows that cumulative ACEs, especially if you experience them during childhood or early adolescence, significantly impact or increase the risk, the risk of persistent health challenges. So when we think about the juvenile justice system, studies reveal that nearly half of incarcerated youth have experienced 4 or more ACEs in their lifetime. So these findings highlight that there's an urgent need for juvenile systems to provide trauma-informed resources and infrastructure to address health and mental health impacts of ACEs. And youth are especially vulnerable to the harmful effects of high-stress environments like detention facilities, right? So they're more susceptible to the impacts of confinement, which can worsen the trauma they've experienced so far. It could disrupt their cognitive processing, and it can strain behaviors and relationships. And it ultimately increases their risk of future juvenile system involvement. So we know that there's a number of supportive conditions in place, right? There's primary and secondary educational programs, behavioral health management, health support, and skill building within facilities. But there's also the prevalence of physical violence or constant threat or surveillance, or even the absence of a stable support system and isolation, which is all detrimental to overall functioning and neurodevelopment. But the built environment likewise further reinforces that through spaces which limit freedom of movement, for example, restrict choice, or even further isolates interactions and connections. And the challenges that we've been talking about are also extending to significantly impact staff as well. These are high stress environments. There's repeated exposure to trauma, which often leads to burnout and high turnover, and even secondary traumatic stress, with symptoms not too dissimilar from those of PTSD. So these conditions not only compromise staff well-being, but can also disrupt the continuity and quality of care for youth. So as I'm sure you're all aware, trauma-informed care is a framework for understanding and responding to the effects of trauma. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration organizes said framework into 6 core principles, all of which are very nuanced in their definition, but also in their application based on the context. So trauma-informed care proposes a shift in mindset and practices, and is one that's been very helpful for us as a team to kind of learn more about and understand how that goes hand in hand with what we do, since it acknowledges the widespread impact of trauma and seeks to create environments that promote healing and resilience. And it starts with understanding that trauma affects everybody, right? That it affects everybody in this room as well, and shapes our behavior, relationships, and responses to stress. So as we think about shifting mindsets and practices in juvenile detention settings, we know that research underscores that most youth in the system have experienced significant trauma. So if the shift in the focus could be from asking what's wrong to asking a youth or a family member what happened, it can shift the system and the practice to operate from a strengths-based perspective rather than focusing solely on deficits. Similarly, for staff in facilities, addressing burnout and secondary traumatic stress requires a commitment in integrating all of these principles in daily practices and culture. So how does this relate to trauma-informed design? It's actually pretty straightforward and should feel very intuitive once we get into it. But on the one hand, it's about good design that minimizes triggers and reduces the potential for re-traumatization by creating supportive, calming, and therapeutic environments. And on the other hand, it should uplift and empower individuals to move beyond trauma through culturally responsive design, opportunities for choice, and the inclusion of beauty. All of this leads to kind of our biggest takeaway so far is that cultural shifts in mindsets and practices should go hand in hand with the built environment that is designed to heal and empower. It's not only this shift that is important, but also how the focus on spaces can come alongside it. So imagine spaces that don't just house individuals, but actively contribute to the recovery. And imagine environments that reduce harm and instead, and also inspire hope, and where every element is calming or uplifting, and it all plays a role in a journey towards healing. So as we move on to the next section, we'll explore how these principles translate into strategies within the design process, so we can set the stage for future discussions on specific design solutions. So we're curious as we wrap up this section, we're curious to hear if something comes to mind around how does the current design of your facility support or conflict with the culture you are trying to build. So again, feel free to come off mute or drop some insights into the chat. I'll try to make sure I watch the chat, but while folks reflect on this, I'll pass it back to Regina to keep us going.
Sure. Oh, thanks, Tara, for typing the question in. Before I start, is anyone really itching to come off mute and share your thoughts? And great, thanks everyone. Oh yeah, I would love to hear it.
Yeah, this is Jennifer Martinez from Santa Cruz County, Juvenile Hall Assistant Director. We are in the process of doing some upgrades to our facility, and one of our focuses is our rooms, our individual rooms. Our facility is quite old, and we've never. I don't know, we didn't invest years ago in larger facilities, newer facility, that sort of thing. So we're dealing with just really small rooms. So any tips that you can provide would be helpful for us. I mean, we really are literally at the point of looking at ordering, additional furniture for the rooms. But again, we're just dealing with such a small space. We've gone and toured a number of other facilities in the last several months that have great options and ideas. But what we've noticed is I think every one of those rooms is quite a bit larger than the spaces that we're dealing with, or that we're working with, I should say.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I think being really limited in space and being able to set the right priorities with what you do and how you can work with that is a really big challenge, and one that
And
hopefully we can talk more about.
I can add one more thing. I think as we've started to share some of our ideas with our staff, I think our baseline as far as our culture is really positive and supportive. I think some of the concerns that tend to pop up are about, and I'm guessing that other facilities have experiences as well, just we're seeing a large number of youth, really specific to the juvenile hall population, so maybe separate from SYTF population, that are just having some really significant behavioral health needs. And while we have some of our behavioral health partners, on board with some of the changes that we want to make as far as things being installed in rooms or additional items in rooms. I know that there's some that they can provide some support in, alleviating or I don't know, helping staff feel more comfortable with some of these changes. But that's just one thing that we've noticed recently is just mindset, maybe a little bit of fear around things that could, somebody could use to harm themselves, or even just behavioral issues, in rooms, that sort of thing.
Yeah, for sure. And, I think really it feels counterintuitive, but often facility softening, it comes with different behavior because of how that makes you feel and act and how you're able to respond to stressors. And so that's definitely something I think we're going to cover a little bit more in the second webinar and really appreciate your input there, Jennifer. So feel free to keep popping in the chat. I'll move us along and then hopefully we'll have some more time to chat at the end of this presentation. But really, really understanding it, and it's very clear that you all are really aware of how space is helping or hurting your ability to do your job and be healthy and thriving. So as Alejandra just shared, we're really excited to talk about how not only trauma-informed design can support your efforts to provide better trauma-informed care, but one thing that many people don't realize is that trauma-informed design really needs to start with a trauma-informed design process. I wanted to briefly give a little bit of background on what the design process is. So many people, when they think about a new construction project or a renovation project, particularly when they're budgeting for it, think of the design process as two steps, design and construction. However, the reality is that there is work both before design and after construction to make sure that the project is achieving the goals you want it to achieve. So what's great is that we have the opportunity to use the entire design process to advance the goals that you seek. It's not just design, it's the process as well. And so one key way that we can use the design process is to center the voices of those that have lived experience. Today, we're really going to focus on the phases before design, so what architects call the pre-design phases, where you'll be setting goals and a vision for your project. And our next webinar will really zoom into design ideas and the design opportunities. So what you'll want to do is start with understanding who is in your community map. Sometimes this is called stakeholders for a project, and thinking about how each of these people should be involved or engaged. You all know better than I do that the juvenile justice system involves many actors that each play a distinct role in the life of a young person and in their family network, as well as those of our coworkers and colleagues. So our work really must begin by acknowledging and understanding the larger ecosystem of this community. As we start to think about this engagement process, I also wanted to acknowledge that there is a spectrum of engagement. Often in projects today, many architects do what we call check the box engagement. They're supposed to have a community meeting, they have one, it doesn't affect the project, and then they move on. So at its worst, engagement at this bottom ignores the people who are most affected by a project. And on the flip side, engagement can also give increasing power and agency to those who will be affected. So a single project may have different elements that show up in different places along this ladder. For example, if you're talking about structural elements of a building, it wouldn't be appropriate to defer to a teenager, but maybe you consult them on how they would be impacted by that structural change. But if you're looking to better understand how design can create a home-like environment or support youth, then we would encourage you to seek as many opportunities as you can to empower kids to have control over their own daily lives and spaces, as well as your staff. So as we get into ideas of the design workshop, what that will start with is identifying the right person to lead your pre-design process. This person is going to be somebody who's responsible for working closely with your facilities team or consultants to gather input from your stakeholders and to guide a building renovation or change. So you'll want to make sure you're finding someone who has existing trust and rapport with the different participants, both on staff as well as the youth. Someone who understands the need to balance things like financial feasibility, culture change, differing priorities amongst different stakeholders, and someone who can balance power dynamics and ensure that all voices are given equal weight. You may choose to have a resident lead the workshop, a youth, a member of the youth, a credible messenger, a community partner, or a trusted staff member who's really leading the charge of understanding and engaging all the different interested parties. Once you have a better idea who will be leading the process, you'll have to decide who's being invited to the design table. We've talked about this a lot, but I'll repeat it. To really redesign carceral spaces, we must transform the design process itself. So historically, those most impacted by design and facilities, the youth and the staff, are not really included in the design process. But by bringing those people who are impacted by design changes to the design table itself and giving them the opportunity to be part of decision making, we can invest in the dignity and agency of your team and the youth. This is a quote from a member of the OYCR Youth Advisory Board who highlighted how transformative being part of a team and co-creating something can be. So they shared the ability to have access to something where you can be part of a team, create something, or learn employable skills is a major platform to heal some hurt and pain. So for youth and staff voices to shape design outcomes, they have to be included at the design table from the beginning. So this means that people around the table will include facility staff, facility management, key people in the probation department, as well as youth, and where possible, mentors and credible messengers, and family or other relevant community supports. In addition to this webinar and some tips and tricks that Violetta will share, we also recommend that you refer to the work of the OYCR Youth Advisory Board for best practices on how to engage young people. So Violetta, I'll pass the mic to you.
Thank you. So in this next section, we'll dive into some best practices for facilitating a design workshop, which build on many of the insights that we heard from the Youth Advisory Board. So first, every time we gather to have a design workshop, it's important to think about how we can help everyone feel comfortable to participate. It may help to explicitly acknowledge the expertise that everyone brings to the table, especially youth, and also to get ahead of any barriers that could affect participation. Some barriers may be, for example, a language barrier or accessibility, or sometimes even cultural norms. And it's also important to be transparent and set realistic expectations. And you can do this by communicating the purpose of the workshop and make sure that everyone is on the same page about it. You may also want to spend some time clarifying what decisions are open for input and what may be out of the scope of your work. So a lot of times when we have these kinds of conversations, we hear a lot of feedback and we may not always be able to address everyone's comments. So talking about goals of the workshop and what you're trying to achieve can help set a realistic expectation. And then during design workshops, it's really helpful to come up with conversation guidelines as a group. And this can help have a productive and a respectful conversation. And if you were to have a disagreement during your workshop, it's helpful to get ahead of it and think about how your conversation guidelines can help manage different opinions in a constructive way. So we'll share some examples of these guidelines that have been helpful to us in some of the workshops that we hosted. So taking turns to speak is really helpful, making sure that nobody interrupts each other. Another important practice is to give the person who is speaking your full attention. And avoiding multitasking or thinking about what you will respond while they're talking. It's also helpful to use I statements when sharing feelings and experiences. And this, for example, means that you can say, I feel X, Y, and Z. And this puts the focus on your point of view. It's a subtle change, but it does make a big difference. And it's also helpful to be thoughtful about your word choices and consider the history and the experiences of all the groups at your table. And last, keep in mind that sometimes people experience things differently, and you may hear input that may seem conflicting. And this is normal, and just remember that you're not there to establish a single truth. And then sometimes during a design workshop, there are people who may dominate the discussion, and it's important to make sure that quieter voices are encouraged to participate as well. And making sure that everyone can participate equally is particularly important in the context of the justice system, where power dynamics will likely affect how comfortable people feel to share their thoughts. So in some contexts, youth may be worried about facing repercussions for something that they say. And this is something that we need to address and mitigate. So for example, you can choose to keep feedback anonymous, or you could also choose to bring in a community partner or a credible messenger that can facilitate a workshop with youth and then report back. So the goal here is to make the design process be a safe and a welcoming space for everyone involved. And last, think about ways in which you can show appreciation for people's time and insights. For example, in the past, we have compensated youth who participated in a workshop with a gift card. And also make sure to follow up after a workshop. This is really important, especially when engaging with youth. So always think about ways in which you can keep everyone updated, keep everyone in the loop, and communicate any next steps. So this best practices that we just shared are meant to help you find healthy and sustainable ways to have conversations and make decisions with those who will be eventually impacted by them. And now I'm going to pass it back to Regina.
Great. So I'm going to transition us into talking about what you talk about in the workshops, and wanted to pause again to hear your voices. I really appreciate everybody's input on space, how your spaces are hurting or helping you. And wanted to also, come back to ask you to think of a space that you wish you could change and what you hope to achieve by changing that space. Another way of asking this might be, what's the why? So what are some examples of what you would workshop? I think we know it's more than picking colors and finishes. And so what this next section is going to go through 4 different types of design workshops that can render a cohesive vision for the transformation of a space. So the first is align on a shared purpose. So what does this mean? It means that you're going to start by creating a project mission together with all the different interested parties to aim to find alignment around what you are trying to do and why. So this will be helpful to guide decisions, to center your overall vision, and keep the team accountable. At the end of the day, did we achieve what we set out to achieve? Second, we'll be reflecting on the role of design. It can kind of be hard to understand what architecture can do. And, I know since 2020, we are all much more aware of the role that space has and when we're in a place that has good ventilation or not. But it'll be important not to assume that people around your table can really quickly and on the spot be super thoughtful about how our spaces are affecting us. So we want to encourage y'all to take time to reflect on what and how design can meet needs as well as reflect your values. This will be helpful in getting warmed up to generate ideas on the overall experience and the feelings that design can achieve. Third, a third type of workshop is identifying the types of uses. So architects go through a process called programming, where we match planned activities to the design of the room. So this can be a workshop that helps you do that. What are the types of uses, activities, or types of spaces that can help you fulfill your need and vision? In past exercises, we've heard a desire, for example, for a barbershop or a yoga and meditation room, a place for residents to have smaller conversations, or just to hang out and make a meal together. So we really encourage you in each of your facilities to make space to brainstorm these ideas and the different programs together. And last is envisioning the ideal atmosphere. So thinking about the overall feeling and experience you hope to achieve, how can we set the mood? In architect speak, this is called finishes or FF&E, which stands for furniture, fixtures, and equipment. And so we encourage you to consider as many aspects as possible, like a variety of color palettes, natural materials like wood, lighting fixtures and access to natural light, different furnishings, where there might be opportunities for creative expression or individuality, or other small or large details like indoor plants or picture frames. So the Mass Design Group team has been developing tools to help different facilities facilitate conversations around each of these topics. So to develop a shared purpose, we have a mission and goals poster and workshop. To encourage personal reflection on the role of design, we have a design workbook. To identify different types of uses, we have an activities and spaces card deck. And to envision the atmosphere and vibe, we have created look and feel cards and a mood board to help translate the design vision. So together with Restoring Promise and the Millbook Collective, we've developed a designing decarceration toolkit, which is aimed to support you and your team through the design process and help our youth return to their homes. So no matter how big or small your project is, we're making a toolkit that will help you empower youth and staff in designing their own environments and helping to translate language into ones that designers and architects can also use to bring that vision to life. So we're in the final stages of getting this toolkit produced, and we'll send up a follow-up email after this webinar with a form if you're interested in receiving a copy. And I'm just scanning the chat for questions, and we'll pass this to Violetta and we can come back and answer some of these Q&A.
Thank you. So what does this look like? When thinking about changing an environment, it's important to never assume what is needed. And there's a lot that we can learn from referencing research and best practices, but it's really important to engage those who live and work and are impacted by a place. So the juvenile justice system involves many actors and each play a distinct role that impacts the life of a young person. And the built environment should be supporting youth needs and uplifting each person's experience and not working against it. So in our work to date, we have centered the voices of youth to shape our recommendations. So for this last part of the webinar, we're shifting gears slightly, and we will share how the voices of youth are daylighting opportunities for how culture and design can directly support the growth and well-being and aspirations of both youth and staff. So the insights that we'll share were gathered through conversations with the Youth Advisory Board, as well as justice-involved youth in facilities and their support networks. And we asked many questions and did different activities, but they all revolved around the central question that you're seeing here, which is, what do youth need to feel supported, inspired, and be able to pursue their goals and dreams? So the insights that we'll share are a good starting point if you're thinking about addressing a spatial need in your environment and are considering what the needs might be. But it is important to always make sure that you layer in the specific context and insights of your community and your county. So we have organized this insights around 5 key themes that justice-impacted youth need to be successful. And these needs are dignity, agency, supportive networks, education and career support, and health and wellness. And in the following slides, we'll explore what each of these needs mean, centering the voices of youth. So first, to be successful, youth need to be treated with dignity. This is a quote from a young person that we heard from that reflects a shared sentiment among many young people who go through the justice system. They shared, "The idea that we don't deserve it gets handed down throughout the system." So treating youth with dignity means to prioritize their physical and emotional well-being. Throughout our engagement, we heard that youth, above all, need adequate mental health support. And they emphasize that if their mental health needs are not met, spatial improvements will likely not make that much of a difference. Youth also shared that during detention, they experienced extreme cold and extreme heat, and highlighted that they need to be physically comfortable both inside and outside. And many young people that we heard from also talked about the importance of having relationships based on respect and humanity and mitigating power dynamics that are often present in facilities. To be successful, youth also need to have agency. So much of the experience of detention is having everything be chosen for you, which doesn't really set youth up to return to their community. So it is important to allow youth to be able to choose, for example, the characteristics of their environment and also the type of interactions that they have with their peers and staff. So this is a quote from a young person that we spoke to who shared, "Being able to change the temperature of the water may not seem like a big thing, but it goes a long way." So youth need opportunities to shape their environment, and this includes being able to adjust the temperature of the water, the quality of the light, the fresh air that comes in, and also to participate in the shaping of the spaces that they inhabit. And youth also share the importance of having opportunities for individual privacy. And this allows them to choose how they approach their peers and facility staff as they build relationships from a place of comfort and choice. And when asking youth what they need to be successful, we also heard about the importance of having access to supportive networks. This is a quote from a young person who, after spending time in detention, shared, "It would have been nice if after you served your time, you're given resources like to a food bank or to a cell phone or transportation that sets you up to be good for at least a month after you're out." So youth shared that they need trusted mentors, resources, and safe spaces to return to. And they also highlighted the importance of being close to their families and loved ones and having the ability to come together in spaces that are inclusive, appropriate, and welcoming. This is a quote that we shared earlier in the presentation that I'll reread because I think it really captures the positive impact that having appropriate education and career can have on youth. So this young person shared, "The ability to have access to something where you can be part of a team, create something, or learn employable skills is a major platform to heal some hurt and pain." So many youth highlighted this importance of having resources, training, and job opportunities that contribute to the development of employable skills. And this also means ensuring that youth receive adequate certifications and recognitions for their learning. And youth also share that they need access to diverse and engaging education with opportunities to choose paths that align with their goals and their interests. And last, youth also brought up the importance of health and wellness. And this is a quote from a young person who highlighted how transformative it was to have access to outdoor spaces and nature. They shared, "Our juvenile hall made plans to open a garden, and one of the youth lifers went out there and just sat down and grabbed a handful of grass and dirt. He was just as happy as I've ever seen him. Access to nature is very healing." This need for health and wellness includes having diverse opportunities for physical activity, access to natural vegetated outdoor spaces, and also having opportunities for creative expression. And having opportunities to be creative can help youth express themselves and feel better in a mental and emotional sense. For example, a young person may not be able to say, "Hey, this thing happened to me and made me feel this way." But they may be able to express those feelings through music or even art. So this 5 themes around youth needs reflect the insights that we've gathered from talking to youth throughout the state. And as we mentioned before, make sure that you talk to your youth and your staff and layer in their experience and their voices and their needs into this existing framework. And we wanted to give a huge shout out to the Youth Advisory Board, whose contributions have been really important to the development of this work. And as you work to implement changes at a physical space and cultural level, we encourage you to reference these resources. So this is the Veria Institute of Justice's Dignity Principles and OYCR's Youth Dignity Guide. And now I'm gonna pass it on to Regina, who's gonna share a quiz and wrap us up.
Thanks, Violetta. So I wanted to give a couple minutes for folks to take a quick quiz. I'm not going to read the questions, but would love for everybody to spend a couple minutes looking over these questions and typing your answers in the Zoom chat. Great, thank you. Feel free to keep anyone, I'm seeing the trend in answers, feel free to answer differently. But great job, everyone. So totally coincidentally, these 3 questions align with our 3 learning goals for today. And it looks like everybody is passing. But what we're really hoping everyone will leave here, remembering that 1, design and culture need to go together. 2, the design process is more than just one phase. And 3, we can use the design process to invest in the dignity and agency of youth and staff. I wanted to give a quick preview and shout out for our next webinar. So really get excited for it and sign up if you haven't already. We can drop the link in the chat. It'll be in 3 weeks on December 9th at 12 p.m. Pacific time. And as a preview for our next webinar, we just really wanted to be talking about, today really talking about the design process, and in 3 weeks talking about how we can translate the needs that we've been talking about into design opportunities. So based on our insights and engagement around youth needs and principles of trauma-informed care, we've identified 6 design opportunities that can support system-impacted youth and staff. So the first opportunity is really increasing access to nature. I think a lot of y'all wrote in earlier that kind of spaces of nature, whether it's the woods or the beach, or places where you feel calm and rested and relaxed. And so really highlighting that as an opportunity that's linked to promoting positive health impacts, healing, and joy. There's also an opportunity to offer diverse skill development. And so thinking about spaces that support this. Like creating spaces for youth to explore and cultivate their career interests, classrooms, quiet study rooms, libraries, spaces that could be used both by youth and staff. This is also about providing access to spaces that help youth and staff self-regulate, like spaces for exercise, yoga, meditation, even to go for a hike and access that nature. Another opportunity is designing for safe and reliable connections. So this means creating age-appropriate and welcoming environments for youth to meet with their family, care providers, mentors, and other community supports. There's also an opportunity to really use space to cultivate autonomy. So thinking about creating opportunities for youth to shape their environment and prepare for an independent life. So we can design for this, for example, by creating spaces that are varied and adaptable, really offering youth and staff choice in their day-to-day. The 5th opportunity that we've identified is prioritizing calming environments. So some ways that we can address this include maximizing daylight, allowing for natural ventilation, and using natural materials where possible. And while we do this, it's also important to really to pay attention to noise and sound, like loud noises like door slamming and buzzing when you hear that constantly, can really affect a person's ability to be calm and self-regulate. And our last design opportunity that we've identified is looking for opportunities to encourage creativity. Art can help foster a sense of belonging and connection and serve as an outlet for self-expression, like Violetta talked about, maybe It's hard to say something very clearly about how something is affecting you. But finding opportunities through art or song or dance to express oneself can be really restorative and really healing. So some spaces that we've seen that can help address that include art rooms, performance spaces, musical studios, or spaces for storytelling, for example. We are doing great on time, and so maybe can open it up to Q&A. And I know there was a question in the chat. Feel free to drop questions in the chat or just open up a space for dialogue. I think Stacy had a question for the room, which is, does anyone have a policy for their sensory rooms? We have a set aside room with all the things, and I'm stuck on the protocols of how the room should be utilized and would appreciate any help. Yeah, just wanted to open up space for any other questions, and also if anyone with the sensory room had input on how that space gets used in your facility. All right, Chelly, I'm wondering if you would, if you're able to come off mute and share a little bit about how your de-escalation rooms operate, and not to call you out or anyone else at the YTC.
Sure, I don't mind talking about our de-escalation room. So we have rolled out one de-escalation room here at YTC, and our goal is to have it implemented for all of our cottages, including our detention cottages. And what went into that project, which in all honesty took about a year, we started with a mural project. We incorporated the youth feedback and the youth art into that mural project, which now is the cornerstone of the de-escalation room that the youth decided to call Nirvana. So the youth were very, very proactive and very active in participating with the developing of the de-escalation room, and we were very intentful in that purpose, because we wanted it to be a space for the youth and for them to be able to utilize that space to be able to, de-escalate from difficult situations with the overall goal of preventing incidents from occurring in the facility. So we of course, when we were preparing the room, once we completed the mural project, we created a positive affirmation wall. We also created a space for the youth to be able to develop a separate piece of individual art that we put on another wall, and is up in that de-escalation room. We also included items like sensory items, aromatherapy, a large therapy dog that we have in place of a therapy dog that we are hoping to implement within the facility. We also included a thermometer as youth walk into this space. Bean bags and rocking chairs and different things that the youth can utilize to be able to de-escalate. We also have the option and opportunity to be able to turn on the TV and have relaxing music and nature schemes and scapes on for them to be able to utilize. We, of course, cannot have items, since we are a commitment facility, we cannot have anything that is made of glass. We cannot have any items in there that can be used as a weapon. So we can't have sharp items in there. So we're very intentional in the items that we've included in that space. And we actually have noticed that over time, we have reduced incidents, and the youth really are asking to go to this room to be able to de-escalate and have meetings in this space that is creating a relaxing mood for them. And has overall reduced anxiety and depression, and assisting them in regulating some of their emotional and behavioral needs. I hope that was helpful.
That was super helpful. Thanks so much for sharing that. I'm curious, have y'all, hearing that youth are asking to go to that room, is there any opportunity for any of the elements of that room to be more available, or in day spaces, or is that room very available all the time? I'm just curious also about if multiple youth, say there's a situation and multiple youth are looking to access a de-escalation room. Has any of
Yeah, of
what you've
course.
implemented there, made
Yeah,
its
so
way into the
we
rest of
have, in our commitment side of our facility, we have 8 cottages. In our detention side, we have 6. In every cottage, we have what's called a multi-purpose room, and that room is primarily used for groups, for individual services, for meetings that we have with the youth and with providers. And so we do use that space not only for individual sessions with our youth, but we use it as a group space when we're doing groups. So there's a variety of different ways that we've utilized that space, and the goal is to be able to have a de-escalation room in every single one of our cottages, because all of our cottages or living units have a multi-purpose room. So the goal is to convert every single one of those rooms in that space into an area that the youth and the staff can use to be able to, to use for whatever purpose they might need.
Thank you. That's great. Stacy, I'm wondering if you wanted to add any color to your question or if you wanted to highlight any particular challenges y'all are facing with your sensory room. And I realize I should have scanned to make sure that Stacy is still on. Okay, great. Thank you, Stacy. Also, happy to take any questions about the design process and or great, thank you, Stacy. And or really appreciated, Jennifer, you kind of highlighting some of your needs and challenges, and also happy to take any input. Our next webinar in 3 weeks is going to focus on design opportunities. We also will have an opportunity to provide kind of one-on-one facility training and technical assistance with, a challenge you're facing or a project that's upcoming for a couple facilities. So that will be an opportunity that we'll share more about later on. But so happy to take any questions about what we talked about today with the design process and or challenges you're facing and what you really hope we can cover and focus on in the next webinar and or via one-on-one training and technical assistance.
I don't know that I have anything specific beyond what I shared. My director is also on here. She may want to join in. Yeah, I think we're trying to be really thoughtful in the process. We've certainly included the youth, other partners like our behavioral health partners, other staff members, in the process. I mean, it's gone well so far, I think. The kids are excited about, opportunities to make their spaces softer and more comfortable. We started hosting, some like kind of community groups back on the living units, and they've had a lot of really good input of things that they're interested in. And then we've pulled some of them in for kind of joint discussions as well. So everything that you've highlighted so far has been really helpful. I think will continue to be helpful. But Sarah, I don't know if you're on here or if you have anything specific that you'd want to add.
No, nothing more than you've shared, Jen. Thank you.
So Lisa's also adding a question. How are different agencies funding their changes? And have you found any things that are not allowed? One thing that I'll add is in some of our Restoring Promise work, we, through our engagement process, worked really closely with the facility manager, who of course has kind of an understanding of what capital needs and expenditures that are upcoming or necessary. And so we were able to work really closely with him to say, okay, we've been holding this budget to repaint X walls and, we could delay that for another year or so. So finding the opportunity to look at the overarching priorities of the facility and seeing where funding might be if made more efficient or diverted. And so that has been something, knowing that there are, of course, always budgetary challenges, working really closely with the facilities manager to understand kind of priorities across the board and seeing how we could kind of, shift investments in one space or another. But I'll also open it up to anyone else in the chat for if you want to come off mute or pop into the chat about where you have found the opportunity to fund your renovations or changes, or run into barriers with things that you've wanted to do that has not been allowed. Another thing that I'll say to the second question is again the kind of the importance of having a facilities manager be involved in the why, like the mission and goals question. So in the past, and for some of these renovation initiatives, sometimes the facility team or security and safety team like wasn't totally bought into the higher level goals of where a facility was trying to go, and kind of put up either real or perceived or maybe not real barriers to saying, X, Y, or Z thing wouldn't be possible. And so I just wanted to add, we've kind of oft sometimes heard conflicting feedback from facilities about what would be possible or not. And a lot of that came down to different people's level of buy-in into those changes rather than an actual barrier legally or by health policy or fire code. And so I just wanted to share, really the importance of the engagement process and thinking through kind of what are those cultural changes, what are those conversations around why we would be trying to change something, so that kind of every member of your team is really on board with where we're trying to go and can be looking for solutions to that together. And Aritali, sorry to call on you again, but I'm curious if you could share anything with your spaces in the cottages that maybe you wanted to implement but couldn't, and or something that you were able to implement but you ran into a challenge in figuring out how to make that happen.
So there's several items in our cottages that we can't implement. One of them being glass. So we have to be very creative with sand trays and different visual implementing, those type of interventions and items into the rooms that we need to take into consideration. We tried to implement a sand tray that had some heavy items that could be used as a weapon, so we had to remove those. So, some of it has been trial and error. Some of them, the items we already know we can't use. We know we can't order glass. We know we can't order heavy items that can be used to hurt anyone else. And so there haven't been too many barriers recognizing the items that we can and cannot use in those rooms. Now, some of the ideas that have been provided since we've rolled out have been opportunities to be able to, maybe have, additional items added that could be used for exercise. Like, some youth were recommending that we had some kind of a punching bag in there that we could implement. How we were gonna be able to put that into that room is something that we've been discussing. But those are some of the barriers that we've experienced. Not very many.
Great, thank you. Could you share about how you were able to fund some of those interventions?
So we get funding I work with the San Diego Probation Department, so we get funding from a variety of different sources. Some of them are grants, some of them, are from JJCPA funding. So we get our funding from a variety of different places.
I also wanted to add another anecdote where we ran into some concerns with one facility's head of security and around some furniture that the residents were hoping to propose to install in their rooms, as well as like build on site. And so what we were able to do was build a couple of mock-ups that then we installed so that the head of security could check out sight lines and feel and test and so that staff could see it and to really understand if it would be a problem or if that was something that they'd be comfortable with. So I think, kind of understanding that there can be process to really understand what the concerns are and alleviate those concerns was another strategy that we have seen or used to kind of overcome some concerns around new initiatives or new ideas.
What I would recommend, and it's something that we did here at YTC, is we actually developed a work group with myself as the lead. I'm the behavioral health program manager for probation. And so we had a lot of subject matter experts in the field providing recommendations. We also had probation officers, staff from Children's Initiative and from education. So really from a variety of our partners, and together we developed a work group and we met every couple of weeks, every few weeks to be able to work on this project. And so we were able to implement and put this room together, looking through a variety of lenses, which was really supportive when we were implementing. And we actually worked with our education department to utilize the art class to be able to begin the artistic expression and ideas for our mural project, which was implemented into that room. So there was a lot of work that went into it, but it came from a work group that was very invested and passionate for this project to roll out. So it was really exciting.
Thank you for sharing. That sounds like a really great process. Awesome. So we really appreciate everyone's time today, and especially those that shared questions and or from your experience. Like we said earlier, we have another webinar in 3 weeks. Apologies, I'm having trouble keeping up with the chat, but wanted to make sure we sent the link to sign up to that webinar in case you have not signed up yet. And then in advance of thinking about that, just wanted to share a little bit of homework. So between now and then, would love for y'all to keep thinking about a space that you wish you could change. And would love to have y'all bring some dreams of what you hope that space could be. So whether it's an understanding of other precedents in different facilities or even spaces kind of outside of a secure perimeter, what would you hope to achieve? What are your mission and goals, and what are your dreams of what that could be? So really, you don't have to do anything with this homework, but just to think about it and bring it to the next webinar, and hopefully we'll make some time to share about what that can be. I'll also just include my email at the end of this deck. We'll follow up with our deck and any additional information about this webinar or upcoming opportunities. But if you think of something or a question or something you really hope we could cover, feel free to drop me an email. I'll put it in the chat as well. But would love to stay in touch and make sure that we are tailoring these webinars as much as we can to meet your needs and where you are. So Tara, maybe I can pass back to you to
Yes,
officially
thank
wrap
you
up.
so much. Thank you so much, Regina. Thank you, Alejandra and Violeta. Thank you so much for sharing such inspiring ideas to shape all of our work. And thank all of you, the audience, for coming. Before you go, we would like to ask one other thing for you. If you would please just take a brief moment, it really is brief, probably takes 2 minutes, to complete the survey. The link is in the chat to give your feedback on your experience in today's webinar. Also, just thank you for your attendance. Thank you for your engagement today. And as Regina mentioned, please be sure to join us for part 2, which will be held on Monday, December 9th. If you have not already registered, you can do so by using the link that's also in the chat just above Regina's email there. And we look forward to seeing you then. If you're not sure if you've registered, it will not hurt to go ahead and register again, just to be sure that you receive your link to join. We will follow up with an email to include a copy of the slides, thanks to the Mass Design Group, and a copy of this recording if you'd like to share it with others in your jurisdictions. Thanks so much, everybody. We look forward to seeing you on the 9th.
Bye. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.